All right. Well, part 3 of Abraham. Only one more of Abraham, and then we're going to be moving to our second part of our summer Bible study series, which is a theme-based series, which is going to be on parables. So we're going to be picking out some of those tough parables to understand and picking them apart during our time here in City Salt. So last week, kind of just recap a little bit, make sure we're kind of moving along. So what was the big thing that we covered last week? Covered Abraham was the first one to do this with his people. Circumcision, okay? Circumcision. And circumcision was the covenant, right? Wrong. It wasn't the covenant, it was a sign of the covenant. And the way, like a simple way of thinking about it is like two people get together, they talk, they converse, they understand each other, they meet eye to eye, and then they like shake on it, okay? That shake was like the circumcision. It wasn't the whole discussion, it didn't embody everything, it was just the sign that sealed it. Okay, so that's a simple way. The other thing we looked at, and circumcision, was a part of kind of the big umbrella term that we've been using, the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, which happened over several chapters. All right, it happened over chapter 12, chapter, I believe, 15. Yeah, 15, 16, 15 and 17. 12, 15, and 17 is where we get the bulk of the Abrahamic covenant. All right, the other thing that we also talked about was who came into the picture. Abraham was always waiting for his son, but got impatient and birthed an Ishmael, all right? And is he the only one who has an Ishmael? No, we all got Ishmaels. We all got Ishmaels because all of us become impatient with God and learning to trust in God's promises. And so we take steps, take matters into our own hands, and we birth Ishmaels. And Ishmaels, like we love them, but yet there's always a tension around the Ishmaels in our lives. There's always a tension, and we'll see that tension come to a boiling point today. And then we ended off talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. All right, we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah. And what did God do with Abraham with respect to Sodom and Gomorrah? He invited him in to a conversation because he wanted Abraham to learn what out of the conversation? The conversation where Abraham would say, God, if there are 50 righteous people, would you destroy everybody, would you destroy the righteous with the evil? And he bargained them all the way down to 10. And why do we see that discourse? What was God wanting to teach Abraham? Intercession. Okay, intercession, but he wanted to teach him like two values, righteousness and justice. Okay, because he wanted the people that would come after Abraham, those who were promised, to exhibit righteousness and justice. And so the people who were to come after Abraham wouldn't see. Was he going to be able to teach them? No. But if you kind of look at the pyramid, you take the leader, you teach the leader the values, you instill in him the character, then it flows down to the rest. Okay? And so we see God working with Abraham to teach him righteousness and justice because he wanted his people to embody righteousness and justice. And we said that as leaders and lights in this world, if we want the world to take certain characteristics or understand certain things, we have to embody them first. They have to become part of our character because our character is where the strength of our leadership is. So strength of leadership comes in character. All right, so that brought us up to chapter 20. All right. Now, before we jump into chapter 20, I want to just go back. When Abraham first, to our first part of the series, when Abraham first came to the promised land, what did Abraham find? A big drought. And what did Abraham do? Got the drought, came into the promised land. He made a decision. Where did he go? He went to Egypt. And when he went to Egypt, what did he do? He lied. Okay? What did he lie about? he lied about Sarah, okay? So we talked about that. Let's go to chapter 20 where Abraham gets to try this again, all right? So let's look at Genesis chapter 20, all right? And let's see how Abraham handles the situation for the second time after he's grown. All right, how old is Abraham right around this time? 99, okay? So last week we ended up that Isaac was promised that in a year's time I'll come back and visit you again. And Abraham was 99, and we know he had Isaac when he was 100. Somehow this story happened between 99 and 100, okay? So let's pick it up from Genesis chapter 20. Read the first 2 verses, and he said, "And Abraham journeyed from there to the south, and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister, and Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah." All right, Abraham. Second chance, same result. All right, we kind of failed on this one again. So he went down to the south, found King Abimelech, and was afraid for his own life, so he said, "You're my sister." And so what did the king do at that time? He took in Sarah to his household, and he sent Abraham, and so Abraham sat on the outside, not knowing what's going to happen. Why is this significant? All right, what has Abraham learned thus far? Okay, what are the things that Abraham has learned? He's learned to trust God in certain areas of his life. Where has he learned to trust God? God chose a place for him to live. All right? There, place of living. He trusted God, you choose where I'm going to live. What else has he trusted God with? Okay, so he would provide in that place, and I'll put in his finances, because he came there, he had nothing. All right, and if you remember when Lot was captured, and then he went and rescued Lot, and he came back, and the king of Sodom said, "You keep the riches and just give me Lot." And Abraham said, "No, I want Lot. You take the riches, and I don't want anybody to think that I have become rich by anybody's hand except God." So he learned to trust him with his finances. Okay, and what is he kind of learning and struggle to trust God with is his timing. Okay, Abraham is struggling to trust God with his timing because what did he do? He took matters into his own hand and brought forth Ishmael. All right, he knew that God said, "I'm going to bring somebody from your seed. He's going to be yours." Okay, but he never gave him a time. He said, he's going to come from you. And Abraham and Sarah got impatient, and they brought forth Ishmael. What has Abraham struggled to trust God with? Going back to our story. Abraham struggles to trust God with his family. To this point, he's struggling to trust God with his family. This is now the second time where he's going down, and a king, and he tells his king that Sarah is my sister. This is important because we're getting to the height of the story of Abraham. All right? When we think about God, who's exchanging with Abraham now, and what God is doing is that he is building a man of faith. But faith happens in concentric circles, okay? He starts off like easy, and then he gets a little bit tougher, and he gets a little bit tougher, and he gets a little bit tougher, and it gets a little bit tougher, right? So when we look at this, living, okay, fine, you can choose. Finances, okay, all right? Your timing, okay. Family, whoa. I got a problem. All right? In a great book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, he talks about God as a divine archaeologist. Okay? And what the author is saying is that God continues to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into our lives, looking for anything that remains as a hindrance between me and God. He continues to dig deeper. Every situation provided is a way he digs deeper, to look deeper into our souls and say, what's separating me from you? What's keeping you away from me? And we know with Abraham, okay, living, we got that. Finances, okay. Timing, we're learning it. Family, still really struggling. Still really struggling when it comes to family. All right? So, Abraham struggles again. And so now let's pick it up from verse 4 where he says, but Abimelech had not come near her. And he said, verse 3, It says, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed you are a dead man, because the woman who you have taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? All right, we'll continue in verse 7. It says, did he not say to me, she's my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this. And God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me, therefore I did not let you touch her. Now therefore restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. All right. So again, we see this theme of righteousness and judgment kind of coming through in this story with Abimelech. And what happens is essentially Abimelech comes back, he pulls Abraham in, and he said, why didn't you just say it? Why didn't you just say that she was your wife? And Abraham responds in verses 11-13. Okay, he says, and Abraham said, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed she is truly my sister, she is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me. In every place, wherever we go, say of me, he is my brother. I think it's kind of interesting. So Abraham, learning to trust God, gets into a place and all of a sudden thinks that even though this is a godless place, God isn't working in the situation. Okay, so he takes matters into his own hand. But I think it's also interesting is that Abraham and Sarah had this agreement before they left. Okay, they knew that they're going to run into this situation because it's a fairly common situation in those times. So they knew about it. So they planned beforehand and said, this is our song and dance that we do. Every time we go into a new kingdom's land, you say, I'm your brother, I say you're my sister, and we'll make it out all right. All right? A lot of times we do this. Okay? We go in with a certain plan due to a certain trust level that we have in God. You know, we think okay, every time I'm in this situation, this is how I'm going to respond to this situation. And we use that for years sometimes. But the thing is, we can't take something that we've decided at, if you will, this sort of spiritual maturity level, and when we're moving, use the same thing, okay? And I'll give you this example, all right? Frequently, I talk to people who are really struggling in their spiritual life, and a lot of times, I'm in a place of conversations, they're in their mid-20s, and you ask them, well, what are you doing spiritually? They give you the same recipe that they've been using since middle school. Come on, we gotta graduate. You're middle school. It's time to grow in our spirituality. We can't use what we've always done. But I'm praying and read the Bible. Okay, but how are we doing it? There's different prayer tools that we can use. There's different ways to approach the Bible. There's different ways to study the Bible. There's different resources to supplement the Bible. There's different there's the Father confession and fasting, all these different things. So at a certain point, we have to graduate in our spiritual life. We have to graduate and see where God is taking us and grow with that. All right? So to kind of summarize the last bit of the verses 14 through 18 to wrap up chapter 20, essentially, Sarah's restored to Abraham, he's given gifts, and Abraham prays for Abimelech and his household, and now they're able to bear children. All right? So all that happened in a year's time. We don't know exactly like when and how far along, Sarah was in the pregnancy, but this happened. All right? But now we want to get to the meat of today, which starts in chapter 21, where the Lord fulfills his promise. And let's take a look at, if we look at the first 7 verses, okay, what we see here is that Isaac is born, okay? And the Lord visited Sarah, verse 1 in chapter 21, the Lord visited Sarah, and he had said that and the Lord visited Sarah, and he had said to the Lord, and as he said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, and at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born of him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse the children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. You know what I love about this section of verses is the part where Sarah says, God has made me to laugh. And so frequently, when God is training us, the training gets very grueling. And it almost becomes depressive. Because God is continuing to work on us, and being worked on by God is not easy. And when we look at Abraham and Sarah, it wasn't easy to leave your country. It wasn't easy to leave your family. It wasn't easy to go to all these different places, to have kings and wars happening all about you. And to be told you'll have a son, but never given a time frame for the son. And having to deal with it in your own hands. And now you have 2 sons that we have to figure out what to do with. So when we look at everything that's going on, what is so sweet about God, okay, is that he engages the entirety of the human spectrum, okay? And what I mean by that is that they experience doubt, frustration, insecurity, anger, disappointment, despair, and now laughter. All of it. There wasn't a part that God didn't touch. He touched everything that we experience. He engages us, the entirety of our full humanity, and he knows how to do it so masterfully because he created it. He fashioned it in his image. So how to make us laugh? He knows how to make us laugh. How to make us down? He knows how to do it. Because we are fashioned in his image. And so we just see something beautiful, like God, truly the creator of humanity, engaging every aspect of our humanity. All right? So now, at the end of verse 7, we have 2 children now in the Abraham household. All right? We have 2 children now in the Abraham household. One, Hagar and Ishmael. Hagar, the maidservant of Sarah. And then we have Sarah and Isaac. Sarah, his lawful wife, and Isaac, who is the son of promise. Now, when we talk about the son of promise and the son of bondage, okay, we want to jump to the New Testament because there's a book in the New Testament that talks about this, and since we're talking about Abraham, it's good to link it to the New Testament, all right? Because it's going to help us understand why this son of promise was so important. Why this son of promise was so important. Anybody know the book in the New Testament that references Hagar and Ishmael? Man, I should have looked at other books, but I'm going to go with the one that I looked at, Galatians, okay? Because I can neither disprove or approve any of the ones that you said. I was just hoping for one answer. All right? So when we talk about it, it's the son of promise and the son of bondage. We're looking at Galatians, okay? And if we flip in our Bibles to Galatians chapter 4, okay? Galatians chapter 4. Everybody who's looking up on their phone, I'm trying to beat you there. There it is. Galatians chapter 4, verses 21 through 31. Okay? It's a bit of a big text, but we'll kind of stop and talk through it as we're going through. Okay? So keep your ears attentive to kind of these themes of freedom and bondage, and Abraham and Hagar, and so on. All right? So Galatians chapter 4, verses 21 through 31. It says, "Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? For as it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through the promise." So let's just make sure everything, all the synapses are there. All right? So Hagar and Ishmael, why are they considered, to be born of the flesh? Because she was young. Sarah was old. Like, an old man could have a daughter or a child with a young woman. Okay, physiologically it could happen. All right, so they did it according to the natural properties of the human body. So it was something that they decided. Under the law of that governs our bodies, they had a child. They had a child. All right? Could Abraham have a child with Sarah? No. Why? Because she was 90. She had way passed this season in her life. Okay? There was no more dead womb than what Sarah had. All right? So that was 23. Which things are symbolic? For these are the two covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage, okay, which is Hagar. For Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem above is free. Okay? Jerusalem above is free. So the heavenly Jerusalem, it's a place where we are not bound by the body, what the body needs, and the limitations of the body. So, but the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. All right? So because of the promise of God, which came down on Abraham and Sarah, and then they had Isaac, in a way that only God could orchestrate. It was God giving us a gift to go beyond what the body limited us. Beyond how the body limited us. Okay? It says verse 27, "For it is written, Rejoice, O barren, you who do not bear, break forth and shout, you who are not in labor. For the desolate has many more children than she who has a husband." All right? Verse 28, "Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise. But as he who was born according to the flesh then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even so it is now." So just hold on to that idea, because we're going to touch on it when we jump back to Genesis. And then the last, verse 30. "Nevertheless, what does the scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free." All right? So, when we look at Hagar and Ishmael in two senses, all right, we'll see the bondwoman. Why do we refer to her as a bondwoman? One, she was the maidservant of Sarah. Sarah ruled over Hagar. The other sense that we want to look at it is Ishmael was born out of the natural ability of man and woman. Okay? There's really nothing special about that. And I want to bring up from the Gospel of John, chapter 1 verse that we read, which is the Gospel of the first hour of the Agbeah, where it says this, "But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believed in his name," okay, or his promise, "who were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God." All right? This does not describe Ishmael. Ishmael was born out of the will of man. Man wanted to have a child, so man slept with Hagar, and Abraham had a child. All right? There was nothing special about this. This was just man taking matters into his own hand. Versus the other side, when we look at Sarah and Isaac in two senses. Sarah wasn't a slave. She was a free woman. All right? her child wasn't born out of her ability. Her child was born out of God's promise. Okay? Her child, Isaac, was born because God gave them the power to have a child. But when you think of this situation that Sarah and Abraham were in, they were in a point of tension, all right? Because they had this promise from God, but they didn't have any, it didn't seem humanly possible or humanly logical. So there was a tension. You're going to have a son, but we're 90 and 100 years old. How are we going to have a son? So there's a bit of a tension going on in the lives of Abraham and Sarah. And they had to live with this tension for such a long period of time. How can one orchestrate having a child at the age of 90 and 100? None of us can do it. It's uncomfortable to live in this tension. Okay? We live in this tension quite frequently. Okay? Where we feel like we're at work and we're like, God is calling me to act like this, to live with certain morals and values, to not fold on certain situations. But I don't see a logical solution. Like, I'm getting to be in a pinch where my job could be at stake, but I don't know how to get out of it. Right? So we live in this sort of tension quite frequently. And it's an uncomfortable tension. But it's a tension that we need to experience, because out of this tension, faith comes from the middle. Okay? It requires us to logically let go of our thought process and how we're going to solve it, and to rely more on God. That tension is a really important tension for us. All right. So if we keep on going, we're going to do couple other verses in Galatians. Okay? And we're going to go to Galatians chapter 5, and read 3 more verses. Okay, 4 through 6. Galatians chapter 5, 4 through 6. And it says, "You have become estranged from Christ, you who attempt to be justified by the law. You have fallen from grace. For we, through the Spirit, eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcised nor uncircumcised avails anything, but faith working through love." Okay? When we talk about our faith, and we're looking at how Isaac was given to Abraham and Sarah through faith, okay, that an essential underpinning to our understanding of faith has to be freedom. Okay? So Sarah had to be a free woman. All right? This gift of Isaac had to come through a promise. Okay? And it was given to us freely. And that's important because when we look at what our faith is to look like, our faith is to look like love. Okay? Love becomes the testament to our faith. And for love to be loved, love has to be free. So when we look at why Sarah had to be free, because faith had to be free. We had to receive faith, through freedom. So I just wanted to touch on those verses, but I do want to keep moving along because we still have to get to a lot of, good things. So if we jump back to Genesis now, and we go to Genesis 21. Okay? And we'll pick it up at verse 8 through 10. So Isaac is born, Isaac is circumcised, then Isaac is weaned, and when Isaac is finally weaned, which probably happened when he was 2 or 3 years old, okay, Abraham threw a big party. And in this party, Sarah's sitting on the side, and Sarah looks and she noticed that Ishmael and Isaac have some sort of interaction. And the way it's termed to us is that Ishmael was scoffing at Isaac. This word scoffing, when you look, can be taken 2 ways. So it's unclear as to which way Sarah took it. All right? In one sense, scoffing has been used to characterize some sort of harmful action towards somebody else, okay? But scoffing is also used to indicate some sort of laughter, like they're kind of playing around with each other. We don't know exactly how it was used, all right? But Sarah looked at it and it concerned her. And so finally she goes to Abraham and she says, it is time. Ishmael has to go. Ishmael and Hagar have to go. And Abraham is really torn, all right? Anytime it comes to issues of family, Abraham is always very torn. All right, but Abraham is torn, so Abraham retreats to God, and God in verse 12, it said, but God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad, because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. All right? As we've been talking about Ishmaels, okay, the Ishmaels are, not only do we have Ishmael the son here, but Ishmaels are something that all of us give birth to. At a certain point in time, we all have to deal with it. Okay? And this is the point where Abraham finally has to deal with Ishmael. And it's a really difficult situation. Because he's also grown attached to Ishmael, because Ishmael is probably, he was born when Abraham was 86, so we're talking about like 17, 18 years old. So there was a strong attachment between Ishmael and Abraham. But finally, Ishmael needs to go. And Abraham is worried because Abraham, like any father would be, is worried like, who's going to provide for them? If I send them out, who's going to provide for them? And so he can make a really good argument to say, if I send them out, they're going to die. But God says, look, I'm telling you send them out. Sarah's telling you send them out. Send them out. When I tell you send it out, don't you think that I'm going to care for Hagar and Ishmael? I already told you that I was going to bless them. Stop worrying about them. Let them go. Let them go. There's one thing I want to point out, that as frequently, or maybe you have gotten into a relationship, okay, in which you feel that, okay, it wasn't the best choice. I've gotten into the relationship. I'm kind of a little bit like tied to this person, but I know God is telling me to end the relationship. But we tell ourselves, if I end the relationship, I'm going to hurt them. Have you heard that from a friend? You're like, end the relationship. But if I end the relationship, who's going to watch over them? Who's going to care for them? I'm really going to hurt them. I know it's not good for me to be in the relationship. Then why are you still in the relationship? Because I don't want to hurt them. God tells us right now that when He calls us out of a relationship, He says, don't worry, I'll take care of the person. They're my responsibility. He took care of Hagar and Ishmael, and He made them a great nation. He will take care of the other person that we got involved with, that we shouldn't have gotten involved with, and He will watch over them. When He calls us to Himself, and that may require us to part ways from certain relationships, God also says, I will watch over them. They're not your responsibility, they're my responsibility. Do it tactfully, do it respectfully, okay? But let God worry about them. If He's calling you to Himself, let Him deal with the rest of the relationship. Why is the sending of Hagar and Ishmael really important right before we get to the part that everybody knows Abraham for? Because family. Abraham is now learning to trust God with his family. It's in red because I just took the strikeout, okay, but we're still learning. But this was a big step for Abraham. Because finally, Abraham took his family and put his family in the hands of God. And he will have to do it yet again. All right. So, let's move on to chapter 22 in Genesis. Famous chapter in Genesis. We're going to start verses 1 and 2. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. Then he said "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." God stresses that this is your only son. It's like, this is the son of promise. Ishmael is now out of the picture. We don't know exactly for how long, but it's probably been a good 5 to 10 years, somewhere in that range. Okay, because I think Isaac has been estimated to be around 12, 13, or a young man. So Abraham hears this call. He says, "Take now your son, your only son, who you love, to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering in one of the mountains that I will show you." All right? We have a contradiction here, or what it seems to be a contradiction, between the promises of God and the commands of God. Okay? Hebrews, put the verse up there, talks about this contradiction. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promise offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, "Isaac, your seed shall be called." So we have a contradiction. We have the promise of God, which said, from your seed all nations will come. But then we have, go offer him up. At face value, this seems contradictory. Why does God give you a son, calls him the promised son, says everybody's going to come from him, and then says, offer him up? Internally, like, your mind says, this is contradictory. Is this the same God that we're talking about? We're sure now it's God A says, here's the son of promise. God B says, offer him up. So we have a bit of a contradiction here that we have to sort through. All right? And Abraham has 3 days to wrestle with this contradiction in his mind. All right? But let's see how he does it. Let's look at verse 3. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. What do we see in verse 3 of Abraham? You ask me, I see maturation in Abraham. We see a huge statement of take your only son, the son of promise, and offer him up. Verse 2. And verse 3 is Abraham arose early in the morning. How many of us, when we don't want to do something the next day, rise up early in the morning? Do we set our alarms bright and early? I don't want to miss this one. No, like many of us probably look for any opportunity to miss the boat on it. But Abraham rose up early. The other thing we don't see is Abraham clarifying with God. Are you sure it wasn't Isaac? Or it wasn't Ishmael? We don't see it going back and forth between Abraham and God. So Abraham rose up early, took his son, took these 2 men, prepared the wood, and headed out. There's maturation in Abraham. How God will fulfill the promise at this point wasn't Abraham's concern, actually. Okay? Abraham just became very attentive to the word of God. When Abraham called in verse 1, said, "Here I am." Right? He became very attentive to God. He knows like there's something going on in the furnace of his mind, okay? But he's like, God has to fulfill the promise. I don't know exactly how he's going to do it, but God has to fulfill it. And so he wrestled with it for 3 days. And on the 4th day, okay, verse 4, on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. Saw the place afar off. And he knew. How he knew, what he saw, we don't know. But Abraham saw it, he knew it was from God, and he knew it had to do with the sacrifice of Isaac. All right, so now let's read verses 5 through 8. And Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the 2 of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father, and he said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am." Second time we hear this coming from Abraham. It shows how attentive he is. He says, "My father." He says, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "My son, God will provide for himself a lamb for a burnt offering." So the two of them went together. How did Abraham know? How do we know that Abraham knew he didn't have to fulfill the promise? Because of what he said in response to Isaac. He said, "My son, God will provide for himself. He'll figure it out. All I know is you're the son of promise, and then he asked me to sacrifice you. I can't figure out the promise, but I can listen to the command. It's not my job to figure out the promise. The only thing I can do is follow the instructions given to me. Okay? My son, God will provide for himself." So what did Abraham realize? Hebrews gives us a little insight. Concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. What's the figurative sense? How else did Abraham receive Isaac from the dead? Yeah, the dead womb of Sarah, because she was so old. So the deadness of her womb, he received this promised child. Abraham's going, and all he knew was that if I go through it, God can raise him up. What was Abraham learning in this test? He was being tested by God, and there are many things, and I'm going to focus on two. Okay, there's many things that we can pull from this. There's also many symbolisms that we can look at Isaac with respect to Christ, and I'm telling you up front, I'm not going to do that, okay? But there's two things that I want to focus on with respect to what Abraham was actually being tested on. All right? Knowledge about God. Okay? To this point, Abraham had gained a lot of knowledge about God. All right? But there was something he had yet to learn. Okay? There was something that he had yet to learn. And what he had yet to learn was the power of God. Okay? Now hold on, and I'm going to explain this. All right? He had the son of promise, and he was told to sacrifice. And we talked and said that these are kind of two contradictory things. But what links them together? What makes following the command of God work with the promise of God? And what it is the power of God. All right? Understanding the power of God and his ability is what makes what seems to be contradictory to the promises of God able to work together. What did Hebrews tell us about Abraham? Abraham reasoned in his mind saying that he could raise him up from the dead. Raising up somebody from the dead requires the power of God. So the link between the contradictions of God, or not the contradictions of God, the promises of God and the command of God, which seem to be sometimes at odds with each other, comes the power of God. All right? When we lack a truthful understanding of the power of God, we find ourselves in situations where we know God is calling us to do something, but our reason and our logic says, it's going to cost me big. So we take a step back. A lot of times what we're missing is an understanding, a truthful understanding of what it is for the power of God to work in a situation. Right? We talk about the power of the resurrection. You know, power of the resurrection can work in your life. We hear it around the time of Easter, and we hear it throughout the year. Okay? We hear it, and we go to our work, and we face the difficult situations in life and the tough decisions we have to make, and we know, like, okay, let me just make this decision, but I know God wants me there, but reason and logic and everybody else is telling me go here. What are we lacking? A truthful understanding of the power of God. Let's move on. Verses 9 and 10. Then they came to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. If Abraham knew that God could raise him from the dead, which Hebrew tells us, why did he go all the way up to this point? What was the fruit of taking the situation all the way up to this point? To the point where he had him on the altar, and he's just about to slay him. Why not say, God, I know you can raise him up. Set up the altar. You see, I'm following you. Let's just stop here. Why do we have to go all the way? Why go all the way? Why does God take Abraham all the way to the end? Because had he not taken him all the way to the end, Abraham would have missed the second most important lesson, which is knowledge of himself. Okay? Abraham had to know himself in order to know God. Abraham was learning the extent of his faith. God knew the extent of Abraham's faith, but Abraham didn't know the extent of his own faith. So God takes him all the way to the end. He says, go, sacrifice your son. I'm not stopping you. I told you where the mountain is. You brought all this stuff. Sacrifice your son. So Abraham now takes a knife, is about to slay Isaac. And we know that this isn't just like a show. Abraham isn't like, okay, it's enough, God. Like, taking all the way to the end. It's not a show. Okay? And then we know it's not a show because of what God said to Abraham afterwards. Okay? Because God said to Abraham, I know that you would not withhold your only son. Okay, that's how we know what Abraham did. Abraham was ready to go all the way. Abraham was ready to slay his son. Because God looks into the hearts of man, and he knows what's in the hearts of us. So he knows what was in the heart of Abraham. And so he knew Abraham was going to do it. Okay? But Abraham was learning the extent of his faith, which was not to have anything in between me and God. Okay? What did Abraham finally learn? His last lesson? I will trust God with my living, I will trust God with my finances, I will trust God with my timing, and I will trust God with my family. He learned the final lesson. But God had to take him all the way to the end. Because when we learn all these lessons, when we learn how to put all these things in the hand of God and trust him for it, okay, what have we now given form to? Our faith. There was now nothing that separated Abraham from God. Abraham held nothing back. Abraham went and he poured everything out before God. And Abraham learned finally that there is nothing I cannot put in the hands of God. There's nothing that is going to separate me from you. I will trust you with my family, with my living situation, my finances, my family, and I'll do it all on your time. Okay? I don't like your timing, but I'll do it all on your time. That's the essence of faith. Faith was often described as throwing one's whole self on somebody else and knowing that you will be caught, that you'll be taken care of. And Abraham took the essence of who he was, his possessions, his finances, his family, and he put them all on the Lord. That's our faith. And we have a lot to learn. Our faith gets tested all the time. Our faith gets tested in how we deal with our finances, where we spend our finances. God always challenges us in that. The nice little luxuries that we like to have. He challenges us there. He challenges us with our families. He challenges us with our kids and what we set up with our kids and where we send our kids and what we allow our kids to do. Like sometimes we struggle to let our kids go in dangerous areas. where the gospel needs to be heard. Understandably so. Like, as a parent, you're afraid. I don't want to send my kid to a danger zone. But God also says, do you trust me with them? You know, there's a lot of things that we need to go through the action of actually giving up in order to have a better understanding of our faith. How much do we really trust God with? So the second part was Abraham had to learn his faith. He needed to know the full power of God, and he needed to know his faith. And in the last couple of verses, okay, verse 11, it says, or verses 11 through 14. It says, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here I am, so attentive to God. And he said, do not lay your hand on your lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horn. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide, as it is said to this day. In the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. All right, so we see that God provides for himself. Abraham sees this place as the Lord will provide. But let's look at the last bit of these verses, 15 through 19. I want to ask you, what is the ultimate blessing for Abraham? Okay? When the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven, and said, by myself I have sworn, saying the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. And in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt in Beersheba. Okay? What was the ultimate blessing for Abraham? What did Abraham gain out of this? A
big family.
Big family. I would say that's what this, like, as we read, yes. Like, the inheritance will come. The people will come. Okay? Is Abraham really going to live to see that, though? He won't.
Maybe just like a stillness inside, like just a sense of like peace and I think also like added to the list that you have is like also just his life, his security, like just kind of a sense of like security and peace.
Okay. Anybody else? God. Abraham got the fullness of God. He experienced God. Like when Abraham put everything out that was in between him and God, okay, he put it to the side, his finances, the timing of everything, his family, everything. Who did he find? He found God. At the end of this, Abraham is looking for God, following God wherever he wants. And at the end, well, he got God. And I agree with what you're saying, that God brings the presence of stillness. God brings peace. God brings all the fruits of heaven here to us. It's about God at the end of the day. What we all work for is God. Who we all try and commune with and understand is God. He becomes the ultimate treasure. Yes, there was blessing and honor bestowed to Abraham, okay? But Abraham went down the mountain with nothing separating him spiritually from God. God became the greatest gift that Abraham received in these so many years of God trying to say, let me get this out of the way. You want to experience me? Let me pull this out of the way. Okay? And these are tough things that he's pulling out of the way. But at the end, what did Abraham receive? God. That's what we do. Okay? And I'll share with you, It is hard. Like a lot of times as we serve in the church, like we want to see things grow. We want to experience things. We want people to be happy and to see them grow in their relationship with God. But at the end of the day, okay, my service has to bring me to God. Because my service and my relationship can't be dependent on everybody else. It has to be between me and God. Everything that I do has to and should be focused on bringing me towards God. That's why, like, the real ministry behind the ministry is what's happening between the individual and God. The ministry and the problems that we face just uncover certain areas that we need to give attention to say, "Hi, something's going on. Let me work on bringing this person to God." Or a big problem happened in the ministry. Like, let me see what God is trying to do to uproot something in me. Why? Not for the sake of solving the problem, but to bring me closer to God. It's always about the person and God. The gift was God. Everything else, those are bells and whistles, because it will come and it will go. But Abraham received God himself. And that's what we need to be working towards. And we see all the challenges that we face aren't there by chance, aren't there by coincidence. All the challenges that we face are God trying to uproot something that stands in our way of a faith with Him. Challenges with our finances, our families, our marriages, our children, our academic careers, everything, all of them, God is trying to uproot something so that we have a clear vision of Him. Any questions? All right, next week we're going to wrap up Abraham, the death of Sarah, the death of Abraham, and sending off Isaac on his way. Okay? Stand up and pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and God, amen. Thank you, Lord, for your blessings. Thank you for this day. And we ask, Lord, that we would look at our lives and we would look and see at all the things that we struggle with. And know that ultimately, Lord, they're there because you desire to uproot them. You desire to uproot anything that we place before you. Any things that we worry about, any things that we obsess over or are afraid of. Lord, you desire to take them out, whether it's our pride, our finances, and even our family. You desire to move them to the side so that we would have an unobstructed view of you, that we would have an unobstructed relationship with you. And truly, Lord, that is faith. When we get to walk and understand your power. Through the intercessions of our saints who please you from the beginning, hear us as we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. In Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, power, and glory. Now, Lord God, the Father, the grace of His only begotten Son, our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ, who gives the Holy Spirit, be with you all in peace, the Lord be with you.